In this, I will be discussing what my life was like living as a Native American in the second half of the 19th century, and I will also be answering some questions along the way. Before the white settlers moved into our land, we had a very distinct way of doing things and, well, surviving. One of our most important food and clothing resources was the buffalo. Rather than keeping them contained and taking care of them ourselves, we would hunt down wild buffalo and use them for things like food, clothing, shelter, and make tools with them. Along with buffalo meat, we would fish and farm things like corn as alternative food sources. The first question I have is, what effects did the migration of new white settlers have on you? Well, for one, the population of buffalo significantly decreased. Many people came and sought out our buffalo because the tough leather supplied industrial belting in factories and raw materials for the clothing industry. It was kind of crazy how quickly the herds were taken down. In the span of maybe 20 to 30 years, the population of buffalo plummeted from over 10 million to only a couple hundred. As you can imagine, this took a toll on my people because one of our most important suppliers was now extremely rare and hard to find. We had to come up with other ways to get the supplies we needed. Another thing was that with the new people coming into our land, new rules and new treaties started to pour in. When the gold rush came, the treaties we'd had previously made were thrown out the window. People came gushing into our lands, completely ignoring the rules that were previously set out. Things really started getting tough when laws like the Dawes Act were passed. Even worse, we hated being moved around, and sometimes we had to travel over 1,000 miles to land that was inadequate for our lives. We were tired, starved, hurt, and just overall defeated by these new things. When we did finally get to stay in our portion of land assigned by the settlers or government, of course, it was extremely hard to hunt and farm, not to mention the fights that had happened along the way that made life even tougher. Like when tensions rose between Dakota Nation and white settlers in Minnesota, it was horrible. The federal Indian agent refused to disperse promised food, which caused many to starve because of the lack of ability to hunt and farm, as I mentioned before. A guy named Andrew Myrick took it as far to say that if they are hungry, let them eat grass or their own dung. Finally, a Dakota band had had enough and killed 5 white settlers, which, of course, resulted in a battle that had gotten so big that even the militia showed up. It finally ended, but it didn't make anything better. Overall, the Native Americans, we were struggling to just survive. And I think on that point, we should move on to our next question. What's something you find unique about your culture? One thing that I find really cool is the headdresses that we wear. Usually they are made of feathers or animal hair, that sort of thing. I just think it's a really interesting way of showing your status or job or something like that, which is very unique to our culture. Another thing that we do, which I find very unique and different compared to others, is what is called the ghost dance. It started because a prophet experienced what he said was a great revelation. It is said that he traveled from his home to heaven and returned during a solar eclipse to tell people about what he had learned. He said, "You must not hurt anybody or do harm to anyone. You must not fight. Do right always." And he said how we must take part in a religious ceremony, and if we did the dance, the ghost dance, our ancestors would rise from the dead, droughts would dissipate, and buffalo would return. So now we participate and practice the ghost dance. In some tribes, when dancing, would have their dancers wear the headdresses that we previously discussed while performing. Overall, life for us Native Americans in the second half of the 19th century was very difficult, with our resources deplenishing and people like Frederick Jackson Turner trying to take our land and say that it's almost America's right, and settlers disregarding us as almost animals. Overall, it was a hard time, but we stuck through it and survived the best way we could. And I hope that even if what has happened in the past was unfair and unjust, we can figure out a compromise with newcomers and live our life how we had before.